Hello, and thank you all for joining my BSides Perth session on stranger danger, finding the vuns before they find you. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands which we meet today, including a special heartfelt acknowledgement to the Wurundjeri people, who are the traditional owners here in Narromine. I'm going to open with a disclaimer. Gasp, I didn't see the asterisks on the talk. Hello, I'm joking. One of the things I always love doing at the start of my talks is I always start with a tech joke because it's important that we always keep smiling, particularly in current times. This is an open source joke, so please feel free to, well, share it anywhere that you want. Why did the vulnerability get tired? Because ransomware. Oh, get it. Hello. So my name is DeveloperSteve. I'm one of the senior developer advocates here at Snyk, and I've been a developer advocate or developer evangelist for a number of years now. One of the things I love most is just being able to geek out with community folks, well, all over the world, but just in general, on a variety of topics from IoT to well, security to coding to infrastructure. As a developer, a long-time developer, and I've been developing for a number of years now. It's just one of the things I love the most. In particular, sort of talking or talking, dealing with, or contributing to open source projects, which is always one of my favorites. Well, like I said, I've been developing for a number of years now. Actually, been coding since the age of 8. Q basic, here, Q basic. But I've been also spent some time in digital agency, building out campaign sites as a CTO, building out a payments platform, and even sort of building out IoT projects or spending time as well. I spent time as an analyst for 10 years. One of the things I love most about building out code projects or building out applications is for the end users that I build those applications for as a developer, as a DevOps, as an all-round geek, really. But one of the things I enjoy the most about that is just building out some sort of experience that means a much easier flow of day or brings something to my end users' lives in so many different ways. If you think a shopping app or some type of entertainment app or a social networking app that just brings people together, as devs, as technology people, we basically build these applications out to make our users' lives just that little bit more easier, interesting, or connected. One of the things I've always been mindful of building out applications through any number of different industry types, digital agency, for example, is when I'm deploying something, just what else is being deployed with it, even inadvertently. If you think of the holistic app stack view as an iceberg, the code that we deploy is basically that little bit at the top that's sticking above the water, above the surface of the water. But inside that, there can be hidden things inside dependencies, inside libraries, the vulnerabilities, if you will, that expose our holistic iceberg stack, application stack, to the wider internet and to malicious actors across the interwebs. It's no surprise that there's quite a growth across the open source ecosystems. As an adopter, as a lifelong learner of open source stuff, that's the thing I love the most is the ecosystems are always constantly growing, constantly learning, and constantly building out new methodologies, new techniques, new libraries. But with that also comes vulnerabilities being surfaced, which we also see in exponential growth across the wider ecosystem or across the ecosystem set, if you will. So, and that's no surprise, particularly as new attack vectors are being constantly identified and that new vulnerabilities are being surfaced, and indeed new techniques for identifying vulnerabilities being surfaced consistently. If we look at the different ecosystem types, something we notice is an emergence of how different vulnerability types are being surfaced in particular ecosystems. If you take NPM, for example, 80% of the vulnerabilities that are identified through open source library use is through indirect dependencies. So I install a particular library, which in turn pulls in a multiple of other dependency libraries, which is where the vulnerability types surface. And there's a number of examples that we see in the wider industry ongoingly where a particular malicious dependency is injected into a popular library type, which is then dispersed across the holistic ecosystem as updates or as installs happen. Indeed, we've seen npm put out alerts before for particular package dependency types and what sort of effect that's had on the holistic ecosystem. And I just want to take a moment there too to recognize that these open source communities do amazing work. I'm a big fan and advocate of a lot of the communities and the work that they do, but more often these are communities run by volunteers, so they need our help as technology adopters, as technology folks, just to help with identifying not only of threats but also potential fixes. There's sometimes a time delay between the initial security alert being raised against a particular library or community project before that is not only identified, but then also fixed, patched, and then a release candidate goes out. So just wanted to take a moment to mention that always, where possible, particularly if you're using something, contribute back where you can. I know you all do. I just like pointing it out. One of the ways we do that at Snyk is through a program called Snyk Advisor, which not only allows developers and technology adopters to be able to do some due diligence on the community and on the package, in particular, if there's any open vulnerability types or if how quickly the identified vulnerabilities through CVE reporting get mitigated, get fixed, and patches rolled out. But also we work, where possible, we work with the community groups to be able to help get those patches underway and get those fixes in place. We also help manage the Node.js ecosystem vulnerability disclosure program as well. And shout out to security researchers that help contribute to this and, well, just help keep our end users safe, which is what it's all about. Anyway, I have some examples to run through. I have an example I'm going to run through. Actually, I do have a whole bunch of these. I can put links in actually while I'm doing this talk. It's a bit meta. Anyway, let's hack an app. So this first one is a demo app, a JavaScript demo app that we have on the Snyk GitHub. It's a Goof app. It's a basic to-do app, which is we use to demonstrate the vulnerability types that we're talking about inside one of the libraries. One of the things I always love pointing out is, yes, there's 62 known vulnerability types in this particular demo, which is why this is, you can try this at home, but this is not for production, local only. If you did want to try this at home, there's an exploits folder already in the repo, which goes through a whole bunch of different vulnerability types, but we're just looking at one today. So, and the one we're looking at is a cross-site scripting attack. It's cross-site scripting vulnerability, which is using the marked package. And anything between versions 0.3.1 and 0.3.6, well, they're basically vulnerable. One of the things I love the most, particularly from the developer side of things, is being able to dig around at the code level and understand the fundamentals of the vulnerability more, which there's all these great links to the GitHub pull requests and such that, as you can see here, you can dig into it some more and even see the initial report and then how long until the fix went out, or if there's one still pending, so you can do some testing on it. Anyway, let's have a look at the app. So, like I said, this is a basic to-do app. And as a user or as an end user, I can basically input a list of items that I can check off or delete or whatever else. The marked library, which we're using 0.3.5, as you can see there in the package.json, we're using 0.3.5. Essentially what it does, it takes user input from that input box and then outputs that or stores that as markdown. So basic markdown stuff. One of the things you can also see here is when we call the library and you can set a sanitized true flag, which is super important. I mean, that should be set to default that should be set to true by default, right? Because we always sanitize user input. What the sanitization tries to do as part of the user input is, well, it tries to sanitize it by a series of regexes and a series of match statements to try and determine if the user input is something we wouldn't want to see stored, because it can make the stored input vulnerable for the end user. So this is a markdown. So let's give it a spin. This is a bold, oops, bold statement. Yes, it is. This is a bold statement. One of the things we can do with Markdown, of course, is links. So we can do something like that, for example, which is just standard Markdown link. And if I hover over it, if I click that now, it would take me to the place that I would think that it was going to take me. One of the common XSS attack vectors is using JavaScript wrapped inside a link, particularly when the stored user input is being resurfaced back to the user's browser session. This is important because, well, knowing that this is the way that most XSS attacks happen, because this is one of the vulnerability types that OWASP talks about, where one of the common vulnerability types that basically allows all sorts of malicious behavior to happen, particularly in the user's browser, doing all sorts of nasty things with cookies, sessions, and whatever else. So injecting JavaScript is something that we would hope that sanitization is going to stop. And indeed, when I click that or when I enter that, you can see that it's stripped out. Well, one of the other common ways to get around this is to URL encode character sets. So doing something very similar, but we're going to URL some characters to try and get around that sanitization function. And so if I enter that now, again, same thing, it's able to identify it and it's stripping it out. The way to get around this particular library sanitization, what the vulnerability is by including a object type in or JavaScript object type like this means that the characters aren't matched and therefore isn't removed. So if I enter that one, you can see that that's actually been accepted. And if I click that now, I get an alert box that pops up and I've basically gotten around the sanitization cleansing, which is our vulnerability type. One of the other demos, I'm not going to do it today, but I did want to highlight it. Oh, it's going to make me log in. I did want to highlight it is we've also got this available in Java and a few other languages as well, this particular app. So if you want to play with some of these yourselves, please do so, local environments or developer environments only, but don't take these production. But I know you won't. I just wanted to mention it. Anyway, let's switch back to the slides. So as developers, again, it's important, as technology people, it's important that we help to protect those end users that we build these applications for, and that we build out and support our technologies for. Because again, if you think back to that holistic stack view, we want to do some due diligence first to make sure we know what we're letting into our stacks and just taking the time to make sure we keep people nice and safe and secure. Of course, now we have a whole bunch of really cool scalable technologies that add to our holistic iceberg view stack, allowing not only some elasticity to be built in, but also we can add in all sorts of cool things like redundancies and whatever else. Essentially, our applications now become way more than our code because we can also control and guide infrastructure as part of our deployments. If you take Docker, for example, there's been over 242 billion downloads from Docker Hub to date, which is phenomenal. And as a dev, as a DevOps, as a DevSecOps, this just means that I can build out applications in my own containerized local environment and then deploy them and have them elastically build out as I need them to. But it's no surprise that we also see the same vulnerabilities appearing in known Docker base images consistently, also given that they're built from the same open source components that we've just been talking about. Consistently, year after year, we see the top 10 Docker base images basically carry the same vulnerabilities with them. One of the things I always love to keep in mind with this is with great containerization comes great responsibility. And keeping your application clean at the code front is just one step of that holistic iceberg view to protecting those end users. The last part of our iceberg is infrastructure as code, where we also get to do some really cool automation stuff. And I love automation. I'm not a lazy dev or a lazy DevOps. I just love it when automation works first time. And I'm always looking at you, Jenkins. Anyway, one of the things I love most about IAC is just being able to set up some nice gate controls so that as I deploy my application, it can go through some automated checks before it finally gets deployed. Of course, it's always important to remember to make sure you're consistently reviewing and checking not only those gate controls, but also the files that you're delivering and building this infrastructure out with as well. Because consistently we see as the infrastructure continually updates or continually goes through that whole industry maturing, we also see new vulnerabilities surface in the form of configuration vector issues. So it's always important to make sure you're constantly reviewing those and checking those as well. But we missed something most important, the most important part, well, at least part of the most important part. This one actually kind of scares me a lot, given, well, I have like a local development environment, don't we all? But we're also seeing the same vulnerabilities now start to surface in developer environments as well, or dev environments, which, I mean, that's the place that, like, people need to leave that alone. That's my place where I build things. What we're seeing now is, particularly with the likes of Homebrew and also VS Code, is a lot of the extensions and add-ons for those particular ecosystems are built from the same open source components that we're seeing these vulnerabilities surface in. So the likes of LaTeX Workshop, Open and Default Browser, and Instant Markdown, for example, we see vulnerabilities like file traversals, which are now starting to create surfaced vulnerabilities in dev environments. Instant Markdown, which I've got the link for on the screen. Well, it's on my GitHub as well. There's a demo walking through how to basically play with or demo that particular vulnerability. If you do install that particular version of VS Code, the Instant Markdown, please make sure you upgrade to the latest version, because that version, don't leave that one installed by any means. Please don't. That particular version's vulnerability basically gives a remote attacker to be able to access your password file, well, basically any file on your Mac. So yeah, just please be aware of the vulnerabilities that are now starting to surface in your dev environments as well, because we're consistently seeing this as an ongoing issue. Homebrew actually put a blog post out about this back in, I think it was April or May, saying that there was some vulnerabilities being surfaced. So please be aware of what you're installing. Anyway, final takeaways: always be scanning source code, containers, infrastructure. Just take the time, do some due diligence, protect those end users, because, well, we love them so much. That's why we build the things that we build. Again, please be aware of what you're installing in your local dev environments. We're seeing this as sort of a growing attack vector now, and all sorts of nasty things are starting to creep in. So particularly if you do install something locally, you just brew install a thing and you're not using it, just brew and uninstall that thing that you're not using. Just remember to clean up your dev environment where you can as well. And lastly, please use your tech superpowers for good. Always remember, I do love that GIF. And always remember to be excellent to each other. Thank you very much.